Long before men proclaimed him king, David was merely an unnoticed shepherd boy in Bethlehem. Among the rolling hills, he guided his father's flock beneath the silent expanse of the heavens. He had no majestic palace, no royal bodyguards, and no armored legion awaiting his orders. His daily world was marked by rough stones, dry dust, and the endless whisper of the desert winds. During long, solitary nights, the silence around him seemed far vast than the world itself. His brothers were tall, powerful, and commanding in the eyes of their father, Jesse. David was the youngest, relegated to early mornings with the flock and returning covered in dust. Yet in those hidden pastures, songs were born where no human ear was present to hear them. While the world saw a simple boy, the Lord was actively shaping the inner depths of his heart. David learned to navigate perilous pathways where sheep could travel safely without falling. He learned to sense lurking danger before his eyes could even spot the creeping predator. In protecting the defenseless flock, the Lord was silently teaching him how he protects his chosen. He led the sheep toward peaceful waters, yet his own soul often thirsted for a deeper divine rest. He walked ahead to clear the trail, even when the direction forward seemed uncertain and dim. In those quiet moments, a fundamental truth etched itself forever into his understanding. He was indeed a shepherd to his sheep, but his life rested in the hands of a higher shepherd. Under the sun, he picked up his lyre and sang not for human applause, but out of pure devotion. A burning fire grew within his chest whenever he pondered the infinite majesty of the Creator. Yet dark nights also descended upon the valley, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. The sheep grew restless in the gloom, sensing invisible threats lurking beyond the campsite. In those moments of isolation, fear whispered that he was too small, too weak, and unprepared. Even when walking through the deepest valley of the shadow of death, he refused to retreat. He held no bronze shield, no iron sword, and no protective armor against the beasts of the field. There was only a humble youth, a fragile flock, and the unseen God who guided every step. He realized that true courage is not the absence of fear, but faith in the presence of God. Every hidden trial in the wilderness was quietly preparing him for far greater battles ahead. Each dark night proved that even in the deepest abyss, the divine hand sustains the faithful. David believed that divine favor would instantly clear a smooth path toward his destiny. Instead, after the quiet pastures came not a golden throne, but years of bitter persecution. His defeat of the giant Goliath was not by physical strength, but by the power of the Almighty. Yet the victory songs sung by the people ignited a deadly jealousy inside the heart of King Saul. What was a celebration for Israel became a threatening shadow to a king consumed by fear. The royal palace offered no safety. Every suspicious glance from Saul felt like an impending spear. As David played his lyre to soothe the king's troubled mind, hatred quietly festered in Saul. The sharp thrust of the spear cutting through the air taught David that danger hides in high places. He learned to sleep with open eyes, constantly listening for footsteps lurking behind closed doors. Rogue soldiers surrounded his dwelling like hungry wolves waiting for the cover of darkness. David had raised no hand against Saul, nor sought his crown, nor betrayed his royal table. Yet he was hunted relentlessly across the wilderness as though his very existence was a crime. Innocence does not always shield a man from the malice of those consumed by envy and fear. He left behind his home, familiar voices, and comfort, turning the dusty road into his sanctuary. No longer just a shepherd, he became a hunted fugitive, measuring time by every uncertain dawn. Every stranger posed a potential betrayal, and every rustle among the rocks signaled danger. In the cold depths of dark caves, David learned to pray with an intensity he had never known. Under open skies, he had sung joyful praises. Inside dark caverns, he cried out from a broken soul. He poured out his anguish before God, laying down a burden too heavy for any mortal to carry. Looking to his right and left, he found no human protector willing to stand by his side. Those who could defend him were terrified, and those who loved him could not follow into the wild. In total isolation, he discovered that God becomes everything when you have nothing left. Surrounded by sharp tongues and deadly traps, David chose to keep his heart anchored in faith. Instead of seeking bloody vengeance when Saul fell into his hands, David refused to strike. He knew he could not build his future by destroying what God had anointed with his own hands. If the Lord had called him, the Lord would guide his steps without righteous hands becoming stained. The wilderness tested not only his endurance, but but his willingness to resist sinful temptation. God does not always rescue a man from the cave immediately. Sometimes he sits with him in the dark. He refines character in silence, shaping a ruler in ways a comfortable palace never could. The hunted fugitive learned that God is not a distant concept, but an indispensable fortress. Saul believed he was destroying David, but he was inadvertently driving him closer to God. Every night in hiding taught him total reliance. Every betrayal granted him spiritual discernment. He was anointed among the sheep, but his character as a king was forged in the fire of flight. When Saul finally fell, David realized that true peace does not originate from wearing a crown. True peace is born in the quiet place where the soul remains bowed in reverence before God. When Israel recognized him as king, he felt not pride, but the immense weight of responsibility. Israel belonged to God. David was merely a humble servant placed over the nation by grace. Jerusalem began to rise before his eyes as a city chosen for a purpose greater than himself. He desired that the kingdom be defined not by military conquest, but by the holy presence of God. When the Ark of the Covenant was brought to Jerusalem, David's heart burned with holy joy. He danced before the Lord with all his strength, unconcerned with royal dignity or human opinion. He remembered sleeping in cold caves and knew that every victory was solely by divine mercy. He proclaimed that the Lord was his rock, his fortress, and his deliverer through every storm. Yet inside the quiet luxury of the palace, a subtle and dangerous peril began to emerge. In times of adversity, danger is obvious. In times of comfort, temptation sneaks in silently. As men bowed before him, the subtle illusion of self-sufficiency began to cloud his vision. No man falls into deep sin in a single moment. The heart first becomes accustomed to ease. While his lips continued to offer traditional prayers, secret corners of his soul began to close. In a moment of spiritual carelessness, he stayed behind in Jerusalem while his army went to war. He looked upon Bathsheba from his rooftop and allowed desire to override his sacred fear of God. Instead of acting as a shepherd of his people, he used his royal authority to satisfy selfish lust. He took what was not his, crossing a sacred boundary that brought immediate spiritual darkness. When his sin bore unexpected fruit, fear replaced desire, leading him down a path of deception. He summoned Uriah, a faithful soldier whose unwavering integrity exposed David's corruption. When Uriah refused to indulge in home comforts while the ark and his comrades were in the field, David panicked. David used his royal power as a weapon, writing a secret execution order with his own hands. He sent a righteous man to the front lines of battle, ensuring his death to cover his own shame. While the world saw a tragic casualty of war, God saw the cold calculation of a fallen king. For months, David walked in silence, attempting to govern while his soul rotted from within. His strength dried up like dust in summer heat, and his bones groaned under unconfessed guilt. Then the prophet Nathan arrived, recounting a simple story that awakened David's moral outrage. When Nathan boldly declared, "You are the man," the divine truth shattered David's defenses. He could no longer hide behind royal robes, make excuses, or minimize his grave rebellion. Falling on his face, he cried out, "Have mercy on me, O God, according to your loving kindness." He realized his deepest wound was not against human eyes, but against the holiness of God. He pleaded not for his kingdom or prestige, but for a clean heart and a renewed, steadfast spirit. He begged that the Holy Spirit not be taken from him, for losing divine presence was true death. God forgave his transgression, but the painful consequences of his sin could not be erased. The sword would never depart from his house, leaving wounds that festered in total silence. His own son, Absalom, allowed resentment to grow into a full-scale rebellion against his father. Saul had hunted David out of fear, but Absalom hunted him with the cold precision of betrayal. Absalom stole the hearts of Israel through smooth promises and deceptive charm at the city gates. When news reached David that the kingdom was turning to Absalom, he chose to flee Jerusalem. Weeping and barefoot, David walked up the Mount of Olives, carrying the weight of a broken family. Many mocked him along the road, declaring that God had finally abandoned the fallen king. Yet even in total humiliation, David knew the Lord remained a shield around his broken life. He slept in the wilderness once more, sustained only by the unmerited grace of the Almighty. When the battle between his loyalists and Absalom's forces began, David gave a desperate command. Deal gently with the young man Absalom for my sake, he pleaded with his military commanders. He was a reigning king needing victory, but above all, he was a grieving father loving his son. When news arrived that Absalom was dead, a profound grief tore through David's inner soul. "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would I had died instead of you," he wept bitterly. He recovered his physical throne, but his arms could never again hold his fallen son. He learned that sin can be forgiven, but its tragic echoes can resonate through generations. In his final years, David sat in Jerusalem, his body weakened by age and his hands trembling. He looked back over a life filled with dramatic highs, devastating falls, and divine redemption. He had been a shepherd, a fugitive, a victorious warrior, a king, a sinner, and a pardoned man. He desired his legacy to be defined not by his conquests, but by the endless mercy of God. "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits," he wrote in his final reflections. He knew that God had not treated him according to his sins, but had redeemed his life from the pit. Like a compassionate father, the Lord remembered that human beings are merely fragile dust. Human crowns fade and earthly kingdoms pass away, but the mercy of the Lord endures forever. Standing at the end of his journey, David's final testimony echoed across the generations. God lifts the fallen, heals the brokenhearted, and remains a refuge to all who seek his face.